inspiration, creative people, problem solving, imagination, discovery, thinking outside of the box. Welcome to InSpiris Audio Magazine, a podcast focusing on creativity, inspiration, and imagination.
Hello and welcome. This is InSpiris Audio Magazine, and you're listening to Episode 1, the Inaugural Show. I'm your host, Spencer Webster. You might be wondering, what is InSpiris Audio Magazine and why should you listen? The first question is relatively easy to answer. I conceptualize a storytelling vehicle where a variety of creatives, artisans, writers, photographers, etc. share what creativity means to them. Among their tales of inspiration, I add essays, fiction stories, and novel excerpts. The goal is to promote people's hard work by sharing it with you. But why should you listen? Because you might become inspired to imagine your own story. You might be looking for a signal of sorts to embark on your own adventure. Well, here it is. InSpiris Audio Magazine is a podcast that focuses on creativity, inspiration, and imagination. You might have heard that in my daughter's intro. I witness creativity everywhere, but what is it? I'm discovering if you ask people this question, you get a variety of answers. I used to think creativity mainly applied to the arts. I've always been a writer, I'm a decent photographer, and I can share stories on video. These facts make me a creator. I've allowed myself to engage my own creativity, but where do my ideas come from? Why does one thing catch my attention and not another? But I also enjoy originality, the making of something new from something known. I enjoy art museums. I get addicted to songs, and a photograph can move me to tears. Why am I so moved? What about the creative process sparks these high peak emotions within me? Is creativity a necessary component to our lives? I say it is, but consumers of imagination and the creators might offer you many different answers. What does imagination allow us to discover about ourselves and our place within the universe? As a reader, I've been transported to a variety of different worlds. Outer space, libraries of forgotten books, and dusty roads where characters were challenged by terror, to name but a few. It was the form of the novel that propelled me to write my own fiction, to share my own landscapes and the characters upon them. I discovered within my own creative process that I can heal some of my past traumas and learn to love and to forgive. However, not all creativity is meant to be enjoyed or discovered. How does modern business leverage creativity and inspiration to achieve innovation, or to communicate a message to attract and then to keep its customers? Or what about the sciences? Does it not take imagination to visualize a rocket blasting off into space, or a microscope peering down at an atom? Someone's question, or thought, or aha moment led to incredible discoveries and continued to do so. Eureka! After I had served in the Navy for nearly a decade, I learned the Navy had journalists, and every fiber of my being told me to change my job so that I could get paid to write. I volunteered with the base newspaper, interviewed sailors, wrote articles, and shot photos during my off-time duty, and built a portfolio. I then applied to become a journalist, and the Navy agreed. And during my second decade in the Navy, I used creativity for much of the time. I found myself inspired by the people I interviewed and shared their stories with the readers. After I retired from the Navy, I worked briefly as a newspaper reporter. But I wanted to tell more human interest and feature stories, and a year later I launched a local tiny magazine I called InSpiris, where I focus on art, spirit, and creativity. The community responded well. I had writers and illustrators, I shared fun stories. I published it until a recession made it untenable in its printed form. I shelved it with the thought that I might resurrect it when the stars aligned again. Since then, video sharing and podcasts exploded onto the scene, and in the back of my brain something whispered, audio is the next frontier. With all my Navy journalism training still rolling around inside my skull, in the advent of inexpensive hardware and software, I decided now was the time the stars had realigned. And so, that diminutive magazine is reborn. InSpiris Audio Magazine is the place where I interview creators and consumers alike and find out what inspires them, how they define creativity, and how they employ imagination in their lives. I will highlight their creative and inspiring endeavors. InSpiris Audio Magazine will be a bi-weekly show for the time being. If you or someone you know might be a good guest for me to converse with, please get in touch. I can be reached at inspiris.editor@gmail.com. That is INSPIRIS.editor@gmail.com. My contact information will also be in the show notes. The show's website address is inspiris-podcast.com. Here, you can find more information about the show, transcripts, and more information about my guests. Also, consider subscribing to get extra content not heard on the show. And now, I'd like to share a flash fiction story I wrote last year about a troll slave named Ganesh, whose challenging life is transformed by a disembodied voice. Fortunate Troll. Sparks flew off his pick, and soon he'd have to pay for sharpening with credits he hadn't earned. He swung his heavy tool and cursed sailors' epithets as white-hot fragments burned his neck. And yet, the solid granite held tightly onto his treasure, dragon-like, and Tech cursed him for not picking fast enough. As piles of lead-colored ore grew at his feet, he reached for his square-nosed shovel and shunted the dark gray bits into a waiting cart with loud, purposeful clangs. Sore muscles protested. He thought about the disembodied creature's voice telling him freedom was near. Ganesh wrinkled his nose. Something else was near. Something foul. "I smell gas," he called up to Tech. The guard stared at him with his one good eye. "Stop farting around down there and get back to picking." Ganesh swung the iron tool, flinching as sparks cast streaks through the air. His muscles begged for relief. And then he instinctively recoiled when a flare blossomed into an orange rose 3 times his size. An explosive brilliance smashed him into darkness. When he awoke, he discovered his thick clothing had been singed and melted onto his flesh. Coarse granite had embedded under his olive-colored skin, and when he flexed his arms, he felt the grinding of the sharp peppercorn-like grains. Tech waddled into the infirmary. "What kind of Nancy are you to sleep 3 days? Get back to work," he barked. Back in the hole, he lifted his burnt pick. Dizziness arose as the words returned, whispering, "Freedom is only a veneer." Ganesh leaned against the rough-hewn granite wall with a thick hand. The hard rock might as well have been a waterfall, and Ganesh fell through into a dimly glowing cavern. The granite solidified once more, and Ganesh's nose wrinkled as he detected a familiar musk-laden odor. A dragon, he thought. Somewhere far away, he heard Tech's angry bellowing, as if he was talking through thick leather chaps. Soon, Tech's voice quieted, and Ganesh heard a different sound, a heavy breathing, rhythmic and slow. Ganesh glanced around for the creature who'd pulled him through the stone as if it were nothing. Fear pulsed within his brain. In the dim light, he saw 2 faint glowing points, illuminating green, then dimming in time with the breaths. And then a reptilian snout appeared. The slight gray dragon stepped into view and looked at him. Ganesh hobbled away. "I'm not interested in eating you, fine fellow," the charcoal-colored being said without malice. "You're my ticket out of here, but I'm afraid you're going to be taking my place in this dark hole for eternity." The dragon grinned at Ganesh as he faded from view, and Ganesh heard the screams of slave and slaveholder alike. Piles and piles of gold and gems lay at his feet. He smiled at his fortune as he leaned against a thick granite wall that parted like a lover's veil. And that was Fortunate Troll. I hope you enjoyed it. That wraps up the first episode. I spoke briefly about my goals for InSpiris Audio Magazine, and I covered my ideas about why creativity is important. Next, I talked about who I will be interviewing and what the format of the show will be. Visit inspiris-podcast.com for show notes and more information, and please consider subscribing. Episode 2 will feature an interview with a high-energy guest named Randy, who served in the Army Special Forces, where he talks about his use of creativity during his time in the military. Thanks for listening, and remember, I see creativity in your future.